Our journey begins at the charming, literary, seaside town of Larne. We travel through the rolling hills of southern Carmarthenshire before crossing to the heart of the wild Brecon Beacons National Park. We explore some of the country's many historic castles and religious monuments, followed by the industrial coal mining heartlands of the South Wales valleys. At Caerphilly, we find fortresses, both ancient and modern, before we plunge into Cardiff, Wales's thriving capital city. The last leg of our journey again takes us from old to new, the Roman ruins at Caerleon standing cheek by jowl with the city of Newport. And then on to Tintern Abbey and Chepstow Castle, a stone's throw from the Seven Bridges, our final destination. This beautiful rolling farmland is outside the historic coastal town of Larne, which nestles on the southern edge of the rural county of Carmarthenshire. The land here is a rare surviving example of an open field system, a medieval land-sharing structure that handed the care and use of the farmland to local people. Each strip of the larger field, as seen here, is divided by ditches. This system is still managed today by a unique town institution, the Larne Corporation, founded as far back as 1291 by the local lord Sir Guy de Briand. The aim of the organisation was to oversee all local legal business, including criminal cases and civil suits, as well as the sharing of these 76 individual strips of land above the town. Larne's other living relic is its outstanding castle. Built originally in the 12th century and redeveloped in Tudor times, its current ruins stand imposingly over the stunning expanse of the glorious Taff Estuary, where the River Taff flows into Carmarthen Bay. At the mouth of the estuary, dropping down off the edge of the town, is the boathouse home of Larne's most famous son, the world-renowned poet Dylan Thomas. The rustic charm of the location gave inspiration for some of his most famous works, such as Over St. John's Hill, which describes his view of birds stalking their prey over the sea, and his masterpiece, Under Milkwood, the radio play that was much inspired by the wonderfully eccentric community of Larne. The River Taff is one of a number of estuaries feeding into Carmarthen Bay. As we follow the peninsula-hugging Pendine Sands, we find the wide blue estuary waters of the River Towy, one of Wales's longest waterways, which flows from the Cambrian Mountains of mid-Wales, situated 121 kilometres to the north. For over 800 years, the Towy estuary has been guarded by the magnificent Llanstefan Castle. A 12th century Norman fortress, its ruins still stand watch over the mouth of the bay. Such a prized strategic location, however, has meant a tumultuous history. The 12th and 13th centuries saw regular battles for its possession between the early Norman conquerors and the rebellious locals. These days, its stunning battlements and towers are listed and protected and is a popular tourist destination. We now head north, following the River Towy upstream towards its source. Its course tacks and turns through typically lush, rolling Welsh countryside before the river plain opens out to Carmarthen. It lays claim to being the oldest town in Wales and is now a vibrant mix of traditional and new. Dating back to Roman times, Carmarthen still remains a thriving market town. As well as its medieval centre, it's also home to a major campus of the University of Wales. This dramatic change of scenery sees us arrive some 70 kilometres east to the midst of the Brecon Beacons National Park, a wild and rugged landscape of astonishing natural beauty that sits on the border of South and Mid Wales. These grassy and heather-clad mountains have seen human activity for over 8 millennia, and today it's in the form of nature lovers the world over, drawing trekking enthusiasts eager to explore its often challenging terrain. The Brecon Beacon Range is the highest in southern Britain, and at its easternmost edge are the Black Mountains, an ancient collection of hills and richly verdant winding valleys that spread across the counties of Powys and Monmouthshire, close to the English border. Deep in the heart of one such valley, the secluded Vale of Uas, sits the ruins of Llantoni Priory, built by an order of Augustinian monks in the 12th century. The ghostly but commanding ruins we see today show evidence of both Norman and Gothic architecture, such as the long arcade of arches. Alone in its valley, Llantoni stands as a stark monument of a forgotten era. Leaving the Vale of Uas, we journey up the valley top to the east, where the Black Mountains drop down into border country. Here on the very edge of Wales is the English county of Herefordshire and the picturesque Olcon Valley. It's where we find the powerful thick-walled keep that is Longton Castle, built around the turn of the 13th century. Sitting on a large earthen mound, the fort was so designed for a very simple reason. Its task was to serve as an unbreakable bulwark against Welsh raids from the Black Mountains across the English border. And today it still stands symbolically guarding the borders with an awesome presence. This stretch of country is scattered with similar castles and strongholds, and heading 20 kilometres southeast we find White Castle, another typically impressive example from the Norman era. With its moat, bridge, gatehouse and sprawling battlements, it's a picture-perfect example of medieval military might. Originally named after the neighbouring village of Llantilio, it later came to be known as White Castle in the 13th century, when its walls were lime-washed from top to bottom, and the name has stuck ever since. Another intriguingly named feature in the region is the looming and iconic Monmouthshire mountain called the Sugarloaf. So labelled, unsurprisingly, for its physical similarity to the old method of forming and selling refined sugar, that of a tall cone with a rounded top. There are several other hills and mountains around the world with the same name. Our journey now takes us into the 20th century and the emotional heart of Welsh industry, the South Wales coalfields. Our first stop is here at the Big Pit National Coal Museum at Blenarthon, which symbolises the importance and inheritance of the now mostly defunct Welsh mining industry. But in its day, it absolutely dominated this whole area of South Wales, supplying jobs for entire communities and fueling the Industrial Revolution during the 18th and 19th centuries. But with what was seen as the declining importance of coal mining to the UK government during the 20th century, many pits were forced to close. This caused widespread unemployment and poverty in the region, the effects of which are still felt to this day. Big Pit has become an emotionally resonant location for generations of Welsh miners, as its historic colliery buildings are still as they were when the mine was fully operational, even though the pit is now a highly popular tourist destination rather than a fully working site. The Welsh coalfields are better known within Wales as simply the valleys, and are a hub of tight-knit working-class communities recognisable by their traditional rows of terraced houses sprawling along the length of the valley floors. Journeying south from the industrial heartlands, we arrive at the town of Caerphilly and its magnificent castle, one of the finest of those still standing in Wales. This 13th century slumbering giant of a fortress is surrounded by a series of stunning moats and watery islands, and was the creation of Gilbert the Red de Clare, a red-headed nobleman of Norman descent. It's an extraordinary testament to craftsmanship and power. The water features alone are entirely artificial and were created solely for defensive purposes, whilst its concentric battlements and barricades are considered some of the finest examples of classic medieval stone masonry in Europe. Gilbert the Red de Clare was also responsible for the initial construction of what's considered maybe Wales's most eccentric castle, Castell Coch. Sitting on the hillside above the village of Tongwynlys, the remains of de Clare's original structure were bought by the Marquis of Bute in the 19th century and redesigned in a neo-medieval style by architect William Burgess. At the time, the Marquis was one of the richest men in the world, having made his fortune in South Wales coal, and as we can see here, he refashioned Castell Coch as a dreamlike Gothic fairy tale castle, with its pointed towers soaring out from the surrounding forest. Today it's considered to be somewhat of a folly, a beautiful but historically inaccurate mishmash of styles, a testament perhaps more to the wealth of one man and his desire to truly live like a medieval king. From here it's south towards the sea and the vibrant city of Cardiff, the capital of Wales. For many years, its industrial heart was to be found here at Cardiff Bay. Once a thriving port, primarily exporting Welsh coal to the rest of the world, the bay is now the symbolic centre of national regeneration. Classic buildings, such as the pierhead, mix with a panoply of modern designs and structures. The bay's most prominent landmark is the award-winning Wales Millennium Centre, with a defining inscription by poet Gwyneth Lewis, a motto for the spirit of Cardiff Bay in its entirety. In these stones, horizons sing. And looking to the horizon, we can see the newly constructed barrage, created in the 1990s to give the bay its permanent high water line, as if the tide is always in. Cardiff itself is in every sense a capital city, being the chief commercial, cultural and sporting centre, as well as the seat of the Welsh Government. And taking its pride of place in the centre is Cardiff Castle, one of Wales's leading heritage attractions and an historic site of international importance. To step through these battlements into its grounds is to embrace over 2,000 years of living history. The outer walls, from Norman times, are built on Roman ones. But the castle is known today for its 19th century towers and battlements, designed once again by William Burgess. His work here is justly celebrated. The main castle is a Welsh Victorian Camelot of opulent interiors and fairy tale towers that attract visitors from around the globe. And adjoining the castle grounds is Cathays Park, home of the city's municipal buildings and considered to be one of the finest of such estates in Britain. It's where we find the monumental Edwardian design of the Cardiff City Hall, built in 1906. And next door is the atrium-topped National Museum of Wales. For the Welsh themselves, though, Cardiff's most precious monument is perhaps this, the home of the national rugby team, the Millennium Stadium. If rugby was a religion in Wales, this would be its cathedral. On match days, up to 75,000 chanting and singing supporters raise the roof to cheer on Team Wales. South of Cardiff, in the Bristol Channel, are two islands, Flatholm and Steepholm, both now uninhabited nature reserves, but which were previously fortified as a defence against possible invasion. Following the coast eastward, we head to Newport. Previously a thriving industrial hub, the city is now a shadow of its past preeminence, following the collapse of the coal and steel industries in South Wales. In recent years, however, the city's been undergoing a major regeneration effort. Newport's industrial past has left some fascinating legacies, like the Transporter Bridge, built in 1906 and now one of only two such structures in the country. Transporters are unique in that they carry goods and people across the water by means of a hanging gondola, like the one we can see here, docked by the waterside. Though Newport is very much a city in transition, it still remains a vital link between Wales and England. It's a permanent stop on the main West Coast rail network that connects Cardiff to London. And the major M4 motorway that joins Carmarthenshire in the west of Wales with the southeast of England. But the history of this region goes back much further than the Industrial Revolution. These are the remains of an ancient Roman arena at Caerleon. Now sitting on the outskirts of Newport, these remains were once part of a much larger Roman military garrison barracks. The site is considered to be the finest example in all of Europe. In its heyday, this arena could have sat up to 6,000 baying and cheering Roman troops, and many of its original features, such as its sunken amphitheatre entrances and sloped terraces, are still intact. Today, the arena is the pride of the village of Caerleon and attracts many tourists from across the globe to Wales, often to see the amphitheatre used for open-air performances and historical recreations. Travelling some 27 kilometres north to the county of Monmouthshire, we come to another of Wales's great border fortresses. Raglan Castle was built in the 1430s, a more recent addition compared to some of the older Norman castles we've seen on this journey. It was created as the lavish home of a local nobleman and wine trader, William Herbert. Architecturally, it's noteworthy for its turrets and massive mullioned windows, which would have bathed its rooms in light. Beyond its opulent design, it was a stronghold too, famously withstanding a 13-week siege during the English Civil War of the 17th century. Eventually it fell, and the revolutionary forces inflicted much of the damage we still see today. But despite that, plenty of grandeur remains, and visiting Raglan gives every visitor a visceral experience of what it might have been like to live with tremendous wealth and power. Following the border with England along the peaceful Wye Valley, we arrive at the haunting ruins of Tintern Abbey. For 400 years, it was the home of the Cistercian order of monks. Until 1536, that is, when it fell victim to a bitter dispute between King Henry VIII of England and the Pope in Rome. In a show of defiance, it was one of 800 religious buildings destroyed on the monarch's orders. It came to be known as the dissolution of the monasteries. Lead from the roof was stripped off, stained glass windows smashed, fittings ripped out and left to decay. But despite the shell of this grand structure being so open to the skies for so long, Tintern remains the best preserved medieval abbey in Wales. Today, it's a popular destination for thousands of visitors each year who come to witness its evocative presence here on the Wye River. Following the waterway south takes us to the last of the major Welsh castles we'll be visiting on our journey, Chepstow. This stunning fortress is the oldest surviving post-Roman stone fortification in Britain and the earliest of the Norman keeps, built only a year after the conquest of 1066. It stands perched between a limestone river cliff and a valley known locally as the Dell on its landward side. Today the castle is very much a lesson in longevity. Century after century it grew along its narrow clifftop ridge. The oldest section can be seen here, the Norman Great Tower, but building work continued well into the 17th century as battlements were modified for guns and cannon. By the 1700s, the castle began to fall into disrepair, and it wasn't until the growth of tourism in the 19th century that its fortunes started to recover, with flourishing numbers of sightseers. And finally, and perhaps suitably, we cross over from Wales to England via the bridges that join the two neighbouring nations over the magnificent Severn Estuary. The first of the two, simply called the Severn Bridge, was built in 1966 and was hailed as the dawn of a new economic era for South Wales. The far longer second crossing was opened in 1996 to cope with the enormous amount of traffic flowing along the M4 motorway. These modernist constructions have been a vital component in opening up South Wales to the rest of the United Kingdom, particularly the economic centre of the southeast of England. And since 1966, the bridges have carried more than 300 million vehicles. But for all their economic and strategic importance to Wales, the Severn Bridges are fixed in the popular imagination as particularly spectacular examples of British engineering. To drive across them high above the water on a sunny day can be quite an experience, with Wales or England ahead of you, surrounded by the vast expanse of the tidal estuary. A fine place to end this journey.